Welcome to the Latched On Podcast. The Latched On Podcast is about the outdoors in Appalachia. Everything from hunting, fishing, camping, hiking, bushcraft, and woodsmanship, and digging into the depths of what makes this area of Appalachia so unique as a whole. It's time to strap in for the Latched On Podcast. Welcome to the first episode of the Latched On Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew. And if you don't know anything about the Latched On Podcast, where it comes from, we started this podcast as an attachment to the Appalachian Outdoorsman, which was myself and a few friends started a YouTube channel, Facebook and Instagram back in 2016. And the Latched On Podcast comes from Appalachia, latching. So we're saying latched on podcast as in like latched on the outdoors, latched on hunting, fishing, camping, hiking, bushcraft, anything outdoors related in Appalachia. That's what the Latched On Podcast is about. And we're going to be talking about all manner of different things. Things as much as, you're going to see episodes in this podcast delving into the depths of history, like Joseph Martin Jr., Daniel Boone, we'll even talk about stuff like the Lewis and Clark expedition in terms of history, the Native Americans that lived in this area and what they taught the settlers and the frontiersmen of this area. We'll even talk about Black Panther sightings and what are they steeped into our folklore, and do they come from superstition? Are they manifestations of our subconscious? Are they actual animals? Are they supernatural? Like, there's things that we're going to conglomerate on with another podcast that delves more deep into that supernatural aspect, but stuff like that you can expect into here. There's going to be all manner of different subjects covered in this podcast. It's not going to be one specific thing. It's not a hunting podcast. It's not a fishing podcast. It's an everything podcast with an Appalachian spin to it. And the best way I can describe that is that everything that you see us talk about is going to be Appalachian. Or everything, or something that has an Appalachian connection to it, or through the lens of Appalachia. We're going to talk about the people of Appalachia, the animals, everything, folklore, stories, everything that you could possibly think of is going to be covered in this podcast with an Appalachian twist to it. We're really going to be focusing on outdoors stuff and history with outdoors and what can be done to get you all involved in the outdoors and all that stuff. So it's really going to be an in-depth podcast that I'm hoping you all will enjoy. You'll be able to read it. I can't believe I said that. But you'll be able to listen to it on your way to work, your way from work, on a road trip. We're going to try and keep the episodes anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour, depending on what's covered in the subject. Make it a perfect little, short podcast. It's not going to take up your whole day and all that stuff. But all we can say is that that's going to be a forecast. And the next couple of episodes that we're going to come out after this is going to be really more in depth and more have like a single subject in line, so that you all can listen to it, and then you can email us, get involved in the conversation. Send ideas to us that you want to talk to us about, and people that we can get in contact to, and we can actually talk to you all about this kind of stuff and stuff that's being brought to our attention and stuff that maybe we can conglomerate on and we can all talk about. So yeah, there's a general forecast of what's going on with the Appalachian Outdoorsman Latched On podcast, and it's going to be a really interesting experiment that we're doing. I've never done podcasts before. I have my first job ever when I was a teenager was actually working at a radio station, so I have a little bit of experience in talking on air and dealing with that kind of thing. But the first time I've ever done a podcast is this one right here. So we're going to see how it goes, and hopefully they'll get a little bit better and they'll be more refined. But as of right now, we're going to go with this and see how it goes. Sounds like it's going to be a lot of ranting or a lot of monologuing or whatever maybe, but hopefully it's not going to be that case. But you know, it won't just be me on here. There'll be other people on this podcast as well, and you'll have more like a sort of like a group discussion type forum with this podcast with many of the episodes. Some episodes will be more like I'll be hosting them per se, and integrating segments from me talking to people like an interview type setting and talking about a specific subject, and then maybe the episode after that, it'll be me and a few other people discussing, just anything random of like, let's just like opinions about what's truly the best time to go camping outside, stuff like that, and then we'll have discussions about why it is, and it's going to be like you'll have episodes of where it's a very documentary type style, very to the point, in depth, and all that stuff. And then you'll have other episodes in this podcast that are going to be very, very what I would consider sort of like shooting the crap type stuff, of where you just have a bunch of guys or a bunch of people in here. They're just talking about different subjects in line and just providing entertainment, hopefully, for you guys listening to this right now and listening to it in the future. So if you're interested in that, this might be the podcast for you. So we will probably have the second episode be a full length episode. In this episode, I'm shooting for 10 minutes. If I can shoot for 30 minutes, I could, but let's be fair, it's more of a general what to expect of this episode. But we will hopefully bring you a full episode here soon, in the next couple weeks. I'm going to try to make this a bi-weekly podcast every 2 weeks. Hopefully we can come out with an episode or something like that. If not, it may be a monthly podcast. I don't, it's all one of those things that we just really just are going to try and feel out and see what's more just suited for you guys, suited for us, and what's the best that we're going to come up with, and what's the best experience for you guys to listen to. And that's really what we're going to shoot for in this podcast. So where does Appalachia even come from? We lived here for hundreds of years. At least European Americans, the settlers, have lived here for hundreds of years. The natives have lived here much, much longer, at least as far back, I think fossil records, archaeological evidence have at least tracks back down to 16,000 years, I think. But the first time we hear the word Appalachia came from a translation from a local native tribe near Tallahassee, Florida. It roughly says Appalachian, but it was altered by the Spanish to Appalachee, and is used to describe the name for a tribe in the region spreading inland to the north. And Tallahassee, Florida, obviously, north of that is Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and all that stuff right around the Appalachian Mountain Range. I'm totally butchering the pronunciation of this. Panfilio de Narvaez's expedition first entered the Appalachian territory roughly in 1528, the summer of 1528, and applied the name, now spelled Appalachian. It is the fourth oldest surviving European place name in the United States. After the De Soto expedition in 1540, Spanish cartographers and map makers began to apply the name of the tribe to the mountains themselves. The first cartographic appearance of Appalachian is a map in 1562. It was first used for the mountain range in 1565 as well. So Appalachia has been named, at least up until on paper, up until the 1560s, based on normal maps and all that stuff. And the Spanish, I think the furthest northern outpost of Spanish exploration is about 60 to 30 miles east of Asheville, North Carolina. So they got pretty far up here. There is some potential rumors and stories of Spanish explorers even making it as far up here as Southwest Virginia, but nothing's been archaeologically confirmed about it, at least not to my knowledge. But I would love to hear all about that stuff, about Spanish explorers reaching the Appalachians in Southwest Virginia, northeastern Tennessee, and all that stuff up until the 1600s, well before the English settlers arrived here, obviously. But in the northern U.S. dialects, the mountains are pronounced Appalachia. It's a oppo. They like to use the lay sound, Appalachia. In the southern U.S., it's more of Appalach, and that's what's based on this podcast, because this podcast is called Latched On, and we are based in the central southern Appalachian Range right here in Southwest Virginia, far Southwest Virginia, in between Kentucky and Tennessee. So the pronunciation is favored in the core region of Appalachia in the central and southern parts of the Appalachian Range. The occasional use of the sh sound for the ch in the last syllable in the northern dialects was popularized by the Appalachian Trail organizations in New England. So you can thank the New Englanders for that up north by coming up with the sh sound instead of the ch sound, based on an accent and dialect difference up north compared to what is down south. For all you listeners down here in the core and southern regions who say the northerners in the Appalachian region cannot say it right, it's just because of a dialectual issue. It's nothing intentional, it's just how they say it. We're all saying the same name. It's the same way as like the running joke is like we say car keys, and the way a Boston person would say car keys is khakis, which is, pants, how we pronounce them here. It's just, just way we pronounce things that are different, and how we were raised and spoke and raised, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're saying the same thing. It's just how the language has evolved for hundreds of years, and we're just speaking different dialects. Appalachian frontiersmen, and this goes up, we're fast forward into like the 16, 17, and early 1800s. There's a romanticization for the ruggedness and self-sufficiency, and I guess the poster child for that Appalachian frontiersman would have to be Daniel Boone. Buckskin clothing, having that long Pennsylvania or Kentucky long rifle, a shoulder strap powder horn, and all that stuff. Long hunters and surveyors that would go out for years at a time out into the backcountry of the Appalachian wilderness in Southwest Virginia, northeastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, Kentucky, where it got famous for. And would go hunting for black bear, deer, and all that stuff, and would make their living off of that well before the era of the mountain man further out west, about 50 years later. So Appalachian pioneers moved into the area largely separated from civilization by high mountain ridges, and they had to fend for themselves against the elements. And many of these early settlers were living on Native American lands, attacked from Native American tribes who were a continuous threat up until the 19th century. And there'll be future episodes that'll delve deep into Native American attacks on settlers in this area. I'm sure people local that live in Southwest Virginia know definitely about Chief Benji and the Cherokee and all that stuff. And there's a lot of stories about that, and we'll be delving much more into detail on that in the future. But as early as the 18th century, Appalachia was simply known as the backcountry by most of the East Coast settlements and all that stuff, and it became to distinguish itself from its wealthier lowlands and coastal neighbors to the east. Frontiersmen often bickered and fought with the lowland and tidewater, higher ups and the elite classes over taxes, and there was numerous disagreements among them, such as the points of armed revolt, such as the Regulator movement in the 1760s to 1771 in North Carolina. And in 1778, there was from Pennsylvania, Virginia, and what is now known as Kentucky, took part in George Roger Clark's Illinois campaign. 2 years later, the Battle of Kings Mountain was a very famous revolutionary battle in this area, and after the war, residents throughout Appalachian backcountry You had the Whiskey Rebellion in western Pennsylvania, and over taxes. I mean, this place has largely been attributed to areas that are very independent and wanted to be separated from the civilization of government, and were very, very animate about, taxes. They did not like taxes at all. It's like when the revolution happened and like the whiskey tax and all that stuff, it was like we were fighting a revolution over taxation without representation, and here we are getting taxed again over simple things as moonshine, liquor being made here, which future episodes also we'll talk about that stereotype for Appalachia and what they call we're moonshiners and all that stuff, and how NASCAR started here and all that stuff. Like a lot of stuff that we attribute to national recognition now started in Appalachia hundreds of years ago, and it's been portrayed as a negative stereotype now, but back then it was not a negative stereotype. It was very just general stereotype. It was just a general thing. It wasn't even a stereotype, but modern media has now portrayed it as a stereotype, as backwoods hillbillies making moonshine, driving their cars, evading the law. We're a bunch of gun-toting hillbillies and all that stuff. That's not us. Yeah, of course, there are some people that live back in the holler. I've known people that live back in the holler, but there's nothing wrong with them. You know what I'm saying? And of course, you'll always have your bad apples anywhere where you live. But in generally, living here for 32 years in the Appalachian Mountains, it is a little rough, and we do have our issues, but there's nothing wrong with it. And there's things that we can fix, obviously, but overall, the country has been through a lot. The area of Appalachia has been through a lot, and the podcast will definitely delve into that from a non-biased approach, and we'll get every opinion we can about it so that you all can be more informed and listen and enjoy. And we hope you all enjoy this first episode of the Latched podcast. More episodes will come, and we'll delve into specifics about a specific subject per se. But I hope you all listen to this and are intrigued, and I hope you tune in for our next episode when the time comes of where we publish it.